Welcome to the deep dive. So our journey for this deep dive started with a really fascinating idea. The Oracle at Delphi. Specifically, thinking of it as like the Supreme Court for the whole ancient Greek world.
Yeah, that was the initial hook, wasn't it? We were digging through the sources, trying to find hard evidence, concrete cases where Delphi's pronouncements were the final legal word.
Exactly, like settling constitutional fights or giving the nod to new laws, making them divine, that kind of thing.
And the idea itself, it's powerful. I mean, a single shared sacred authority holding together all those competing Greek cities.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right? You need something beyond just politics for real legal legitimacy.
But, well, as we got deeper into the material we had, the specifics on Delphi acting as a formal court, they were pretty thin on the ground.
Frustratingly so. Lots about prophecy, lots about guidance, but not quite the smoking gun for a judicial mechanism as such.
Right. So we had to pivot a bit. It was like we went looking for this one specific thing, the Oracle as judge, and instead we found something maybe even bigger.
A whole landscape of ancient authority, really.
Yeah. It opened up this huge question. Where did ultimate authority actually come from in the ancient Mediterranean? And the sources pointed to two, well, really different answers. Athens, with power in the people, the demos.
And then Rome, where eventually all authority gets wrapped up in one person, the emperor. His will becomes sacred, almost.
So the fact that we didn't find tons on Delphi's legal role actually pushes us towards a more fundamental question, doesn't it?
Exactly. It forces us to ask, how do any of these societies make their laws stick? How do they legitimize using force, making decisions?
How do you get stability?
Right. And the answer seems to be you always tap into something higher, whether that's the collective will in a democracy or deep-seated religious beliefs or, the sheer power of an emperor who might even be seen as divine.
Okay, so that's our mission today then. To unpack those big principles about law and authority using the material we did find. We'll start in Athens, look at how their democracy, their courts, handled conflict and tried to keep things fair, or at least managed.
How they try to manage the power of the elites, particularly.
Then we'll explore those moments where justice gets really tangled up with religion and, surprisingly, drama.
The theater, yeah, crucial stuff.
And then we make the jump to Rome. We'll trace how power shifted, how the emperor's word slowly but surely became law itself, and what that meant for things like punishment, family, property.
It's a huge shift. From distributed authority to hyper-centralized, it should be quite a ride.
All right, let's dive into Athens first. Oh, famous for democracy, sure, but also, as you said, a really competitive place, this agonistic society idea. So how did they actually run their legal system? How did they stop the rich and powerful families from just taking over?
Well, one of their key mechanisms was pretty radical, actually. For many of their top officials, the archons, they didn't elect them based on who was most popular or qualified in the traditional sense.
No. How then?
They used a lottery, sortition, choosing by lot.
Just pulling names out of a hat, basically.
Yeah.
For high office.
Essentially, yeah. The idea, according to their own democratic principles, was to deliberately level the playing field. It equalized the chance for any eligible citizen, rich or poor, to hold these positions.
Okay, but that sounds incredibly risky. What about competence? Weren't the archons important? They couldn't just be anybody, surely.
They were important, but the Athenians were clever about the structure. The sources make it clear that this whole lottery system only really worked because the most critical state duties, the ones needing real expertise or involving huge responsibility, they'd already been taken away from the archonship.
Ah, okay, so they carved out the really high-stakes jobs. Where did those go?
Mostly two places. First, the popular courts. The dicasteria. Thousands of citizens serving as jurors, spreading the decision-making power really wide. Accountability to the masses, you could say.
Makes sense. And the second place?
The generals, the strateges. There were 10 of them, and they held the real power, especially in foreign policy and military matters, and they were always elected.
Elected, not chosen by lot.
Right. By a show of hands in the assembly, everyone knew you needed specialized skills, real competence to lead an army or a navy. You couldn't leave that to chance.
So the archons, chosen by lot, what were they left with?
Mostly routine administrative stuff. Police duties, organizing festivals, preliminary hearings for court cases, the kinds of things, as the sources put it, that any citizen with, average probity, diligence, and capacity could probably handle.
Average honesty and competence would do.
Pretty much. So you get this split system. Democratic equality through the lottery for the everyday administrative roles, but meritocracy through election for the really crucial strategic roles like the generals. Think of someone like Pericles. He was elected strategos over and over, but he wasn't an archon picked by lot.
That's a fascinating balance. Okay, so that's how they tried to manage office holding. But what about the courts themselves? The sources really hammer this point about lawsuits being, well, personal. Feuds, almost.
Yeah, this gets back to those agonistic values. The whole society was built on competition. And the court speeches we have, they're dripping with language about enmity, ecthroi, enemies.
So going to court wasn't just about finding the objective truth, like we might think of it.
Not primarily, no. It was definitely seen as another arena for competition, a way to pursue these long-standing rivalries and conflicts, but crucially, within a legal framework. The court was a resource you could use against your enemies.
So the goal was victory, publicly beating your opponent.
Absolutely. It was about getting a verdict in your favor, which wasn't just about the specific issue at hand. It was about enhancing your own status and often publicly humiliating your rival. For Athenians, freedom itself, eleutherias, was kind of tied up in this constant competition, the hamila among citizens for honor and the people's approval. The trial was just another form of that contest.
That really reframes things, and it explains why a concept like hubris was so important in their law, doesn't it? We translate it as arrogance, maybe, but it sounds like it was much more specific and legally charged.
Oh, completely. Hubris was a legal charge, not just a personality flaw. It meant outrageous violence, extreme arrogance, yes, but specifically actions intended to insult or degrade another person's status and dignity.
So it wasn't just about physical harm.
Not solely. It covered physical abuse, certainly, and it did include forms of sexual violence, though we need to be careful. The sources show its focus was different from our modern concept of rape. It was broader. The core of hubris was about the intent to shame, to assert dominance in a way that violated the community's sense of order and equality.
Like punching down or even punching up, if it was done with excessive insolence.
Exactly. It was about upsetting the social equilibrium, and this became a key tactic in court. If you were arguing before a popular jury, thousands of ordinary citizens, you'd try to paint your opponent as hubristic.
How would that work?
Well, you'd tap into those existing social tensions. Maybe the jury resented the arrogance of the old wealthy families, or perhaps they disliked ambitious newcomers like Cleon, who seemed to be getting too big for their boots. You'd accuse your opponent of hubris to harness that resentment.
So you're saying this person isn't just wrong, they're a threat to us, to the democratic way of life, because of their outrageous behavior.
Precisely. You're asking the jury to punish them not just for the specific act, but for embodying this dangerous antisocial arrogance. It was a way the demos, the people, could collectively push back against perceived threats to their equality and dignity.
So the Athenian legal system, for all its democratic ideals, was actually hyper-aware of social status and used concepts like hubris to actively manage those tensions.
It was a constant negotiation of power, played out in the courts. The law was a tool to reinforce the idea that before the court, at least, citizens were meant to be equal, and hubris was an attack on that very principle. #tag2, the fusion of justice and divine will in Athens.
Okay, so the courts handled the everyday conflicts, the social balancing act. But what about the really big questions? Justice, fate, divine will. Where did Athens grapple with those?
For that, you really have to look at the theater. Greek tragedy, performed for the whole city during the festival of Dionysus, wasn't just entertainment. It was profoundly political and religious drama.
A public forum for working through the toughest moral and cultural issues.
Absolutely. These plays directly addressed the tensions in their society, their values, their relationship with the gods. They were thinking out loud in public through myth and performance.
The prime example here, connecting justice, vengeance, and the city's law, has to be Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy.
Without a doubt. It's unique because it literally ends in an Athenian law court, the Areopagus. The final play stages a trial judged by Athena herself and Athenian citizens to resolve a cycle of bloody vengeance. It speaks directly to the city about its own legal system.
And the key to understanding how deep this connection runs, according to the sources, is this one Greek word, telos.
Yes, telos. It's incredibly rich and, frankly, quite unsettling in this context. It carries a whole cluster of meanings.
Like end or goal, right? But also other things.
Right. It means end, final point, purpose. But it also means the consummation or fulfillment of a religious rite. And on top of that, it means payment, tax, or the final settling of a debt.
Okay, so end, ritual, payment. how do those all fuse together in the Oresteia around the idea of justice or dika?
They create this intricate knot where death, sacrifice, justice, and payment become almost interchangeable. The justice demanded by the gods or by fate often looks like a ritual act and the settling of an old blood debt. It's all wrapped up in telos.
Can we see that in action, like with Clytemnestra in the first play, Agamemnon?
Definitely. When she kills Agamemnon, her husband, she doesn't just describe it as murder. She uses intense ritual language. She talks about pouring the fatal blows like libations, offerings to the gods below.
And she prays to a specific god.
She prays explicitly to Zeus Teleos, Zeus the fulfiller, the one who brings things to their telos. She asks him to fulfill her prayers.
Which is chillingly ambiguous.
Exactly, because fulfill here, using telos, means fulfilling her plan, completing the murder. But it also frames Agamemnon's death as its own kind of telos, a necessary end, a sacrifice, maybe even the final payment for his own past crime of sacrificing their daughter, Iphigenia.
So his death becomes a ritual consummation, a legal settlement, and the end of his life, all bundled into one word.
Precisely. It shows that at this deep cultural level, the Athenians saw justice, diko, as woven into the very fabric of the cosmos, involving gods, rituals, and inescapable cycles of debt and payment.
And the trial at the end of the trilogy in the Areopagus court, that's the polis, the city, stepping in to manage this dangerous cosmic system.
That's how Aeschylus presents it. The human law court, established by Athena, becomes the mechanism to finally break the cycle of vengeance. It translates these overwhelming divine and familial obligations into a manageable civic legal process. It civilizes the telos, you might say.
But even as the city tried to create this stable fusion of law, religion, and civic order through things like tragedy, there were individuals who pushed back, right? Who claimed a different kind of divine authority.
Ah, yes, and this leads us straight to Socrates. He's the ultimate challenger to this neat civic fusion.
How so? In his trial, as recorded in Plato's Apology.
He basically claims the right to follow his own interpretation of divine law. He talks about his daemonion, that inner divine sign or voice that guides him. And the sources point out his interpretation was so personal, so original, that it made people suspect his gods weren't actually the same gods the city officially recognized.
Which is a massive political problem in Athens. You had to acknowledge the city's gods. Their worship was part of civic identity, part of the legal structure.
Absolutely. And Socrates doubles down. He tells the jury, the embodiment of the democratic city, that he won't beg for his life or act in a way he considers impious, because that would be betraying the divine mission he believes he has.
He's putting his personal understanding of divine command above the laws and expectations of the entire community.
He is. He essentially argues that his philosophical mission, his questioning, his search for truth, even though it annoys everyone, is mandated by a higher divine authority, and that authority trumps the judgment of the Athenian assembly.
So, if the Oresteia shows the move towards integrating divine justice into stable city law,
Socrates represents the opposite pole, the assertion that individual conscience, guided by a personal understanding of the divine, might actually stand above the collective law of the polis.
it's a fundamental tension, isn't it, between the community's shared beliefs and laws and the individual's claim to a higher truth.
It really is, and Athens ultimately couldn't tolerate that challenge. Socrates' insistence on his private divine mandate, even leading to his death sentence, highlights this deep conflict, and it sort of sets the stage for what we see develop later in Rome, where that kind of individual claim against the state becomes almost unthinkable under the emperor's total authority.
That's a perfect transition. Let's make that leap now, from Athens to Rome. We're moving from this democratic, sometimes chaotic, philosophical approach to justice
To something much more centralized, systematic, and frankly, authoritarian in the Roman Empire. The whole source of legal authority just fundamentally shifts.
How dramatic was that shift? What was it like before the emperors?
In the Roman Republic, legal authority was quite dispersed. It wasn't neat. It resided in this complex mix, a concatenation, the sources say, of different magistrates, traditions, procedures. There wasn't one single body or person just making law.
But that changes completely under the empire.
Utterly. By the time we get to the High Empire, maybe the 2nd century AD, the situation is crystal clear. The famous jurist Ulpian sums it up perfectly.
What did he say?
Quod principi placet legis habet vigorem. That which has been decided by the emperor has the force of law.
Just like that. His decision is law.
By Hadrian's time, yes. That wasn't just a theory. It was the operational reality of the legal system. The emperor wasn't just the final judge or interpreter. He was the living source of law.
So how did this work in practice? Did the emperor sit in court all day? How did he actually wield this legal power?
Well, local courts and governors still handled a lot of the day-to-day stuff, but the emperor reshaped the whole landscape, especially in criminal matters. His main tool was the appeal process.
Appeal.
Yeah. Under the Republic, citizens had some rights to appeal to the people's assemblies. Under the Empire, that gets replaced by the right to appeal directly to the Emperor Appellatio. This effectively gave him the final say over any significant case anywhere in the Empire if he chose to take it.
And he could use this power politically right from the start. The sources mention a conspiracy under Augustus. Caepio and Murena.
Ah, yes, 22 BC. That's a really stark early example. These two guys, Caepio and Murena, were accused of plotting against Augustus. They were found guilty, even though they weren't present in absentia, and sentenced to exile.
Okay, standard enough, maybe?
But they didn't leave Italy quickly enough. They delayed. And Augustus, well, he didn't wait for them to go. He sent agents after them who hunted them down and killed them.
After they'd already been sentenced to exile. That sounds highly questionable legally.
It definitely strained the limits, even by Roman standards. There were some precedents for pursuing enemies, but this was pretty blatant. Executing men already sentenced without a further trial.
So how did Augustus justify it? He must have offered some rationale.
He did. He claimed the whole action, including the pursuit and killing, promoted demotion, the Greek term, or utilitas publica in Latin, public utility, the good of the state.
Ah, the necessity of state argument.
Exactly. And crucially, he got to define what constituted public utility. So this concept became a kind of imperial trump card. It could override normal legal procedures, even deeply held philosophical ideas like the Stoic view that you shouldn't punish someone in anger. The emperor's perception of state need became the ultimate legal principle.
Wow. Okay, so the emperor is the source of law. His intervention is justified by public utility. Yeah. What else characterized Roman imperial justice? The sources mention something pretty grim about social status.
Yes, this is a fundamental and, to us, quite shocking aspect. Roman imperial law didn't even pretend to apply equally to everyone. Punishment was explicitly, legally differentiated based on social class.
How did they divide people up?
Broadly into two groups. Honestiores, literally the more honorable people. Think senators, knights, wealthy landowners, veterans. And humiliores, the lower or more humble people. Pretty much everyone else, common citizens, laborers, freedmen, peasants.
And the punishments were actually different depending on which group you were in.
Drastically different. Take the death penalty. The really brutal, degrading forms like crucifixion or being thrown to wild beasts in the arena, those were almost exclusively reserved for humiliores.
What about the honestiores? If they committed a capital crime?
They might still be executed, but often by methods considered less shameful, like beheading with a sword. Exile was also a common penalty for the elite. Even non-lethal punishments varied. Like physical discipline. The sources get an example. A provincial governor had the authority to have freeborn accused persons beaten with rods. Painful, yes, but preserving some dignity. But if the accused was a slave, they'd be whipped, maybe even flayed with the flagella. The tools themselves reinforce the social hierarchy.
It's justice designed to maintain the existing social order through fear and degradation for the lower classes.
Absolutely. And this status distinction permeated everything, even how they dealt with people involved in the legal system itself, like accusers or informers.
Informers, delators, were a big part of the imperial system, weren't they? Spying, bringing accusations.
They were vital for political control, yes, but also dangerous. If an informer brought a case, especially against someone important, and failed, the consequences could be severe.
What happened to failed accusers?
In the Republic, it might just be infamia, a formal loss of status, disgrace, serious, but mostly social. Under the emperors, though, it got much harsher, especially if the emperor felt the accusations were frivolous or malicious.
Harsher how?
Trajan provides a vivid example. He apparently got fed up with informers clogging the system or making trouble, so he staged mass trials of them in the Colosseum.
Trials in the arena.
Yes, followed by mass confiscation of their property and deportation, shipping them off to remote islands en masse.
And the source mentions Pliny the Younger, witnessing this and calling it a beautiful sight.
It's telling, isn't it? It shows that imperial justice wasn't just about guilt or innocence, it was spectacle. It was about demonstrating the emperor's power, purging perceived troublemakers, and terrifying everyone, both the common people and the elite, into obedience. The harsh punishment for failed informers was a clear warning. Don't mess with the system, don't bring weak cases, especially against the powerful, unless you're absolutely sure.
Okay, so we've seen the emperor's immense power over public law, criminal justice, punishment. But Rome is also famous for its highly developed private law.
Mm-hmm.
The rules governing family, property, contracts, the stuff of everyday life. Where did authority lie there?
Well, the bedrock of Roman private law, especially in the earlier periods, was the family structure. And at the heart of that was the concept of patria potestas, paternal power.
The power of the father. How extensive was that?
Almost unbelievably so, by our standards. It defined kinship itself, what they called agnatic relation. Basically, you were related through the male line under the power of the same paterfamilias, the head of the household.
Even adopted children.
Yes, adoption brought you under that power, made you part of the agnatic kin group, and this power was lifelong unless the father chose to emancipate the child or until the father died.
Lifelong. So even an adult son, maybe married with his own children, was still legally under his father's control.
Legally, yes. A son remained a filius familias, technically unable to own property in his own right. Everything he acquired generally belonged to his father. The Roman family was described as an imperium and imperio, like a mini-state within the state, ruled by the father's authority.
That must have had huge implications, especially for women and inheritance.
Absolutely. When a woman married under the traditional form, manus marriage, she legally left her father's family and entered her husband's. She came under his power, or his father's if he was still alive. Her children belonged entirely to her husband's agnatic line. They were legally lost to her birth family. It was all about preserving that strict paternal line of authority and property.
Wow. But you mentioned property. Was there any way for a son still under power to own anything? The sources hinted at soldiers.
Ah, yes. This is one area where the practical needs of the empire, especially the military, led to an exception. A son serving as a soldier could acquire and keep certain property obtained through his military service, his peculium castrans. It was a crack in the otherwise absolute wall of patria potestas.
An early form of independent earning tied to state service. Okay, let's shift to property more broadly. Rome gave us so many core legal concepts. What about use capion? Sounds technical.
It is a bit, but the idea is simple and important. Use capion was acquiring legal ownership of something simply by possessing it continuously, openly, and in good faith for a specific period, set by law, 1 year for movable things, 2 years for land in Italy.
So, like squatters' rights, but formalized. What was the point?
Stability. It was a way to cure defective titles and ensure that, eventually, possession matched legal ownership. If you held something for the required time without the real owner challenging you, the law basically said, okay, it's yours now. Yeah. It prevented endless disputes about old claims.
Makes sense. And then there are concepts like usufruct and servitudes. These seem to split ownership in complex ways.
They really do. A usufruct is the right to use and enjoy the profits of something that someone else owns. Like, you could be given the usufruct of a farm, you get the crops, the income, but you don't own the land itself.
And the source had that example about a shared usufruct.
Right. If a usufruct, say, over a slave was left jointly to 2 people, and one of them lost their right, maybe they died or forfeited it, the whole right didn't shrink or get divided. It automatically went entirely to the other co-holder. It shows how they treated these rights as kind of indivisible units.
Interesting. And servitudes, like rights of way.
Exactly. Rights that burden one piece of property for the benefit of another. A classic example is a right of way allowing your neighbor to cross your land to get to the road. These rights attached to the land itself, so they passed on, even if the properties were sold.
But there were limits, right? You couldn't just create any servitude you wanted.
Correct. The source gives a great example. You couldn't create a private servitude over the sea. Why? Because the sea, by nature, is open to everyone. It shows that even within their incredibly detailed property law, the Romans recognized some things as fundamentally part of the commons, beyond private control.
Acknowledging a limit to private ownership. Okay, finally, let's touch on contract law. We think of Rome as the foundation for contract, but the sources say a full theory developed quite late.
That's right. It took a long time for Roman law to fully embrace the idea that just a simple agreement, a meeting of minds, should be legally binding. Their earliest contracts were very formal.
Formal how?
Like the stipulatio. It depended entirely on using specific, precise question and answer formulas. Do you promise to give X? I promise. If you didn't use the exact words in the right order, no contract was formed, no matter what you intended. The obligation came from the form, the ritual words.
So not about intent, but about performing the legal script correctly.
Initially, yes. But eventually, they did develop consensual contracts for major things like sale, hire, partnership, mandate. Here, bare agreement was enough to create a binding obligation.
And what concept became crucial for making these less formal agreements work?
Good faith, bona fides. This became central, especially in contracts like sale. The law started to look beyond the strict words to the underlying fairness and honesty of the transaction.
And the source had an example about bad faith. Dolus.
Yes. It says that in a contract of sale, the seller's bad faith, their dolus or fraud, should always be taken into account, even if they cleverly put a clause in the contract saying they weren't liable for any defects.
So if they knew the thing they were selling was faulty and hid it, that fraudulent intent could override the written contract.
Exactly, because the action based on purchase was considered an action requiring good faith. If the seller deliberately acted fraudulently, they couldn't hide behind a contractual clause to escape responsibility. It shows that even this highly structured, pragmatic legal system recognized a need for a basic level of honesty and fairness for commerce and society to function properly. #tag outro.
So we started this deep dive looking for the oracle at Delphi as a Supreme Court, but we ended up mapping something much broader. The very foundations of legal authority in the ancient world. Whether it was rooted in divine will, the community, or an all-powerful emperor, that ultimate source of legitimacy was absolutely crucial.
Yeah, it really was the bedrock. In Athens, we saw justice tied up with democratic competition, with managing social tensions through things like the lottery for some offices and the charge of hubris. Power was, at least theoretically, dispersed among the citizens, even if constantly negotiated.
And the theater played that fascinating role, exploring the links between justice, fate, and ritual, trying to make sense of it all for the polis.
Right. Then you shift to Rome, and it's a stark contrast. Authority doesn't just get centralized, it becomes embodied in one person, the emperor. His word literally becomes law.
And that shaped everything, how political opponents were dealt with under the guise of utilitas publica, the brutal status-based punishments, even the fine details of family power and property rights.
What stands out across both, though, is this relentless drive for legitimacy. Whether it's Athens grounding its law in democratic participation and shared values, or Rome grounding its law in the overwhelming power and perceived necessity embodied by the emperor, both systems needed to anchor their legal structures in the highest authority they could conceive of.
It was about stability, wasn't it? Translating that ultimate power, be it the gods, the people, or the emperor, into rules that could actually govern society.
Precisely. The law needed that absolute backing to be truly binding and effective.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider, based on everything we've discussed. We saw Athenian democracy relying on citizens of average probity, chosen by lot for many roles, placing trust in the collective. We saw Rome concentrate all justice and authority into the hands of a single, unaccountable emperor. So the question is, which system, ultimately the one trusting the many, or the one empowering the few, provided more consistent, maybe more predictable justice for the average person living under it?